What labs should you order on keto or carnivore? And what kind of changes to those labs should you expect? Why should you listen to me? I was featured on the first ever Carnivore TV show, Reverse TV series. I have a PhD in nutrition and exercise physiology from the University of Miami. I have coached thousands of clients and I have taught for over a decade at the University of Miami, DeVry University, Miami-Dade College, and the American College of Sports Medicine. And you can check out some testimonials on my website. And also, I have lost 30 pounds and managed to maintain it. All right. So, a usual panel that you probably have lying around, or if you want to go and get a complete blood test, including everything that I'm going to go over right now, you're probably going to want to start with CBC or a complete blood count. I'm not going to go over each and every one unless that specific test would be expected to change once you do keto or carnivore, and I'll explain what to expect. So CBC is going to have your how much red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, hemoglobin, hematocrit. Hematocrit is the amount of whole blood that is made up of red blood cells. It's going to be a little bit higher on keto and carnivore diets because of the higher likelihood that you're going to lose more water when you're not eating carbs. Remember, every time you eat carbohydrates, 1 gram of carb is going to bind to it around 3.2 grams of water. And so when we remove carbohydrates on keto and carnivore diets, it's almost as if we're a little bit dehydrated, especially in the initial phases. And so it's okay to see hematocrit being a little bit higher on keto and carnivore diets. And then a comp or a comprehensive metabolic panel is another major test that includes 14 different substances. One of them is the fasted blood glucose. I filmed a whole other video to explain why you should not worry for the most part if you are a strict carnivore for a long period of time. I will make sure I link that video at the end of this one, because technically you want it to be in the 70s or 80s. Mine are usually like around 72. Sometimes it'll go to like 82 right after a meal, a carnivore meal. But you generally speaking, we tell everybody like you don't want it to be higher than 100. But again, there is this caveat on strict long-term carnivores where we sometimes do see it a little bit higher than 100 milligrams. So you really do want to watch that video to understand why sometimes it's okay if that happens. And then calcium chloride, sodium, potassium, bicarbonate, all of those are electrolytes. And then albumin, and then I'm sorry if you hear my dog trying to break the door to get in, that's just my dog. He'll give up soon enough. Okay. ALP, AST, AST, those are your liver enzymes. Now, here's something that you want to pay attention to, the AST to ALT ratio. So, AST and ALT, again, those are tests for your liver function. If ALT is is going higher, and so the AST to ALT ratio drops to less than 1, this basically indicates that you have fatty liver disease. Usually it's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it comes from a high consumption of carbohydrates and sugars over a long period of time. And you should expect that, by the way, to normalize, because once you do keto or carnivore, this is one of the benefits of it is that you're not eating all the carbs, you're not eating all the sugars, and so you start healing your non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And more tests within the comp panel. You're going to see blood urea, nitrogen, creatinine, total bilirubin, total protein. Now, the lipid panel is something that I would recommend that you check. I did a whole other video on the blood lipid panel. It's about should you worry if you have high cholesterol on carnivore diets. I'll make sure also I link it at the end of this YouTube video. I go a little bit more in depth about all the different subfractions of cholesterol, triglyceride, what to expect when you do keto and carnivore diets. So I'm not going to go into it right now. Just make sure at the end of this YouTube video to watch that one. Thyroid hormones. Also, there's a little extra detail that goes into that. So I filmed a separate video that I will also link at the end of this YouTube video to understand why thyroid hormones drop and why that's not an indication of a slower thyroid function, because we don't see an accompanying drop in your metabolism. So if what basically the gist of it is that yes, your thyroid hormones are going to drop, but you're just going to become more sensitive to the activity of thyroid. And that's why your body doesn't have to produce as many thyroid hormones as it used to, because you're just more sensitive to it. You just need a little bit. And so we also know that your metabolism, we actively measured your metabolism and it does not slow down. So again, for more details, just check out the other video on that. Most doctors also only measure TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and it's a very late stage indicator of hypothyroidism. So if you really want to make sure you catch any abnormalities with your thyroid function, I would get the full panel. The TPO, the antibodies, reverse T3, free T3, free T4, all the stuff, not just the TSH, which is what most endocrinologists, most mainstream medical doctors will usually order. Usually, if you prod them a little bit and you convince them, it might take a little prodding, but sometimes you can convince them to give you the full panel and hopefully insurance will cover the whole thing. If not, go to ownyourlabs.com and you can get them for really cheap. Graves' disease is also another form of thyroid autoimmune disease whereby your thyroid gland becomes overactive and it can be triggered by plant toxins. And so the carnivore diet usually will fix that or at least help it a lot, depending if there are other contributing factors or not. Now, vitamin D is a good test also to order, because low levels of vitamin D can worsen insulin resistance and prediabetes. So you want to make sure you're supplementing if you are deficient or using a vitamin D lamp. Also, since a lot of people are deficient in a vitamin D, it's a great idea to also supplement with vitamin K2, because if you're taking vitamin D supplements and that's increasing calcium absorption in your gut, all that calcium might linger around in your blood and calcify your organs instead of going into your bones. So now your bones keep getting weaker. You might have a higher risk of osteoporosis, and that calcium is lingering around and around your blood vessels and organs, increasing the odds of calcifying those organs and increasing the risk of kidney stones and heart disease. And so what you want is to make sure every time you're supplementing with vitamin D is to also take along with it vitamin K2, especially if you're not going out of your way to boost your dietary intake of vitamin K2 from grass-fed animal foods and especially grass-fed dairy and high-quality eggs. So vitamin K2 is like a chaperone. It's like a taxi that takes the calcium, ushers it away from your blood vessels and organs and puts it where it's supposed to be in your bones. So never take vitamin D supplementation without also supplementing with vitamin K2. And oftentimes, if you go to Amazon or anywhere you buy your supplements, you will see that they generally tend to put them together. So it's usually vitamin D plus K2 supplement. All right, HbA1c or hemoglobin A1c. This is a great test because it shows you how much glucose is attached to your red blood cells over the last 3 months. So it shows you how well your blood sugar was regulated for the last 3 months, with a little bit more emphasis or more bias over the last 2 months. Now, here's the thing. Usually, when HbA1c drops, we're happy because that means that somebody's improving their blood sugar regulation. But when we go keto or especially carnivore, sometimes the hemoglobin, the lifespan of the hemoglobin gets so long, and that means it's not dying at the same rate that it used to die before. So if it's living longer, it has a higher propensity to attach to more glucose molecules over time. And so the HbA1c might not really drop that much. So I would not be panicking if HbA1c isn't dropping, even though you've been carnivore for months on end. It's just that the lifespan of the red blood cell is getting longer. Urine analysis. On keto or carnivore, you're going to start running on ketones for a lot of the times. And so that's a specific type of fat that we run on. You become a fat burner as opposed to a sugar burner. So especially in the initial stages of keto and carnivore, you might see trace amounts of ketones in your urine. Do not worry about that. Eventually, the more keto adapted you get, the more your body starts to use all the ketones as opposed to releasing it in the urine. Uric acid. Now, keto and carnivore diets tend to lower uric acid levels, especially as your insulin resistance improves. So this is something that worries a lot of people. They think that I can't eat red meat, I can't eat all of these animal foods because they have something called purines. And when you consume purines from the diet, the idea behind it is that it's going to convert into uric acid and it's going to lead to gout and gout symptoms, joint pain. And so people with gout often worry about eating red meat, organ meat, seafood because they have been told that these foods contain purines, right? The truth is that your body actually produces its own uric acid, whether you eat the purines or not. And it seems like people who eat a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of sugar, a lot of processed foods, they tend to have worse gout symptoms. And so your own body can make purines depending on how much sugar you're eating, which is going to increase its own production of uric acid and lead to worse gout symptoms. And we see this over and over again with massive relief and sometimes complete remission of symptoms of gout. All right. A good test to order is a fasting insulin or HOMA IR test. It's much more important than just measuring your fasted blood sugar levels because your blood sugar levels could be doing really well for a long period of time just because your body's compensating for this dysregulation in your blood sugar by producing a lot of insulin. And so you can catch abnormalities in your blood sugar regulation way sooner if you're also checking fasting insulin. So high insulin levels are an earlier symptom of dysregulated blood sugar, which eventually leads to conditions like type 2 diabetes. And just because your fasted blood sugar is now great does not mean you're not going down the road of prediabetes and eventually type 2 diabetes, right? And so I always, if you really want to get a clear picture, you really want to check your fasting insulin levels as well. And it's a great motivator because once you do keto or carnivore, this is almost like the number one thing that drops very quickly. Okay. Lipoprotein insulin resistance score. This is interesting here because it's more reliable and a better test than the fasting insulin test that we just covered. It's a blood test that measures insulin resistance by analyzing the levels and sizes of lipoprotein particles in the blood. So I have a separate video on blood lipids and how high cholesterol might be worrisome for some people on carnivore diets. I will make sure I link it at the end. And in it, I describe the different subtypes of lipoproteins or LDL. And when you order that test, it's called an NMR, lipoprotein profile test, NMRLP, and it's only, as you can see here, it's only $78 on ownyourlabs.com, and you don't even need your doctor's prescription. That's in case you could not convince your doctor to order it. Then if you get that test, it will come along with the lipoprotein insulin resistance score. And so this will tell you how likely you are to have prediabetes or diabetes down the line based on analyzing the lipoproteins, like your cholesterol levels in your blood, the subtypes of it and the sizes of it. So the LPIR score is usually reported on a scale of 0 to 100, with higher scores indicating greater insulin resistance. And what it does is it looks at the different subtypes, like the VLDL, the scores of of 6 different subtypes of your lipoproteins or cholesterol molecules in your blood. So it gives the score for VLDL, and then it sums it up with the large VLDL particle, and it sums it up with the LDL size plus small LDLP plus HDL size of the HDL plus large HDL particle. And so it adds all of those 6 lipoprotein scores. There's a specific way how they add that up. And the sum of that equation is going to give you the lipoprotein insulin resistance score. So, but basically what you want to know is if you're going to get a result from 0 to 100, the higher the number, the higher insulin resistance you have, or depending how extreme it is, you might be already pre-diabetic or diabetic. So the studies have shown that this test is as effective in predicting your risk for type 2 diabetes, including in people who are taking statins. Even if you're taking a statin, and so your blood cholesterol level is depressed, like your total cholesterol is low because you're taking a statin, even with that, it doesn't matter. The NMR LP plus insulin resistance score that you can get from Own Your Labs or from any place really, but it's just that Own Your Labs is cheap. It's going to give you this very accurate and effective test, which is your lipoprotein insulin resistance score. Because it's not really looking at the total number of cholesterol, it's looking at the sizes and the subtypes of your different types of cholesterol in the blood. And C-peptide, a C-peptide, this it's also known as connecting peptide. It is a substance produced by the pancreas when insulin is released into the body. Every time your body releases insulin, it also releases C-peptide along with it. And so it's very helpful if you have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and especially if you're taking injections of insulin. When you get a C-peptide test, you can determine how much insulin is being produced by your body versus how much insulin is coming from the injection. So C-peptide levels can help to determine if a patient with diabetes still needs insulin injections or not, or if they can kind of taper off of their insulin injections and maybe move over to something like metformin or some other form of medication for blood sugar regulation. So that's a great thing if you start keto or carnivore and you have type 1 or type 2 diabetes and you're injecting insulin, and so you don't know how much better your body has gotten at regulating its blood glucose. You get a C-peptide test and you see how much better your own production, especially in type 2 diabetes, how much your own production of insulin is getting better. Oral glucose tolerance test, or an OGTT test. So you fast for at least 8 hours, and then you take a solution that contains sugar or in the form of glucose, and then you have your blood sugar tested at multiple intervals up to 2 hours after you take that original solution. And it's really a good test to see how high your blood glucose gets 2 hours after ingesting carbohydrates. It shouldn't be more than 140, so it should be less than 140 milligrams per deciliter. As a matter of fact, if you have a blood glucose meter at home, you can run this test yourself 2 hours after you consume a meal, especially if that meal contained carbohydrates. It shouldn't be above 140 milligrams per deciliter. And just like a fasting insulin test, it is a much better indicator of metabolic health than simply measuring your fasted blood glucose levels, because it shows how the body is reacting. Because you might have a low blood glucose morning test, fasted test, but then you see how it's going really crazy during the day after you eat. And that's how you can catch it. One of the ways you can catch those blood sugar dysregulations. HSCRP, or high sensitivity C-reactive protein. I love this test because it tells me your overall levels of inflammation in the body. So I often order it, especially if somebody has very high LDL cholesterol numbers and they're worried and we don't know their overall health and lifestyle status. So the high sensitivity CRP tells me, is there underlying inflammation going on? And it's very routine to see it drop and drop to less than 1 when people go on keto, but especially carnivore diets, and especially if they're working out and doing other healthy lifestyle changes. Advanced iron testing. So a lot of people are worried about hemochromatosis or iron overload when they go on carnivore diets. I've covered that topic in a separate video. I will also make sure that I link it at the end, because I go a little bit into detail as to whether you should worry about that, or if you do have a genetic susceptibility to having iron overload, what you can do about it. Carnitine is a molecule that transports fat into your mitochondria to get burned for energy. If you have low levels of carnitine, it's associated with fatigue. And so you can supplement with that. You can test for it. And then if you're low on it, you could supplement with that, or you can just increase your intake of red meat. And I talk more about the supplementation protocols that I have covered with my clients, and also some of the supplements that I take in my guide, Monster Mind, the supplements on DRZALDIVAR.com/shop. Homocysteine is another good test. High homocysteine signifies more inflammation in your body, or it might signify that you have a problem with methylating. It's called methylation issues, which is driven by a genetic mutation in your MTHFR gene. You can test for that, by the way. You can go on like 23andMe or some of those genetic tests, and they can tell you if you have methylation issues like the MTHFR gene, which basically makes it very difficult for you to absorb and activate B vitamins. It's hard for your body to utilize them. And so if you do ever supplement, you want to make sure you get the methylated version of the B vitamins if it ends up being that you have the MTHFR gene. And almost like half the population have the MTHFR gene, which is why when you're supplementing with B vitamins, I always be on the safe side, and I would recommend always getting the methylated version. All right, fasting cortisol is another great one to detect prolonged stress that might be due from being zero carb for a long period of time. There is something to be said. I know, and for the most part, I believe for most people, they tend to do great on carnivore, but there is a subgroup of the population, especially if they're very active athletes, very lean, that sometimes fasting cortisol can go up from being strict carnivore for a very long period of time. We will explore this topic further in future videos, but for now, I think it's just a good idea to get a measurement of it if you want to have all of your labs before you start, let's say, keto or carnivore. Or if you know you're already stressed, if you know your cortisol is high because you're drinking tons of coffee and things like that, then you already know it's going to be high. You can just change your lifestyle and habits and then get a fasting cortisol level and see how that has improved. Sedimentation rate, also known as erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Erythrocyte is just another name for red blood cell. So, what is the sedimentation rate? It's a blood test that measures how quickly your red blood cells settle at the bottom of a test tube in 1 hour. A higher sedimentation rate, so the quicker it settles, that means you have more inflammation in the body. What should the values that we're looking for be? Males under 50 should be less than 15 millimeters per hour. For males over 50, it should be less than 20 millimeters per hour. For females under 50, should be less than 20 millimeters per hour. And for females over 50, should be less than 30 millimeters per hour. Again, Own Your Labs is a great resource. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form. It's just very cheap and you don't need any insurance. And it is founded by Dave Feldman, who has been doing a lot of great research on cardiovascular health, especially within the context of the primal lifestyle, like keto and carnivore diets. And so he set this up. And so you can get your test there ridiculously cheap. All right. And if you need extra help, you can always contact us on my website, drzaldivar.com/coaching for one-on-one coaching, and drzaldivar.com/shop, where you can see all my guides. I don't know if I mentioned the dopamine brain one. That's the one that I generally talk a lot about because it is so critical to help people raise their baseline dopamine levels in order to be able to stick to any dietary change, and because that's the number one thing that I find most people struggle with. And that was the topic of my dissertation. So I started working on that in 2014. And for 6-7 years straight, all I studied was how to raise baseline levels of dopamine in order to prevent cravings and so that people can actually stick to the diet. Because we all know cake isn't the best for us, right? But why do so many people struggle to steer clear from eating those foods that they know are not the best for them? And it has to do with targeting the root cause of those cravings, the root cause of not having motivation or energy. All those things have to do with your baseline dopamine level, not just regular dopamine, but baseline, which is a completely different animal really to attack. Alrighty, thank you so much for watching. I'll make sure that I link the hemochromatosis, which is the iron overload test, the high blood glucose test, the thyroid destruction on carnivore, and people who are afraid that their thyroid is going to be messed up. And I think I forgot to mention also, I'm going to add the lipid one. So it's like really 4 videos that I will add. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you did, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video, and also so that I would know that you like this kind of content and I can create more like it. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.